Hey, Emma.
Yes, Madelyn.
What do you call it when you bring a huge amount of books back to the library way past their due date?
I don't know. What do you call it?
Layton and Returnal. Hello, and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone. Sorry, my
Good?
dog sighed behind me right as I was wanting to sigh from that joke, and it was very funny.
You gave me half of that joke.
Well, that's only because you were like, Emma, please help me. I can't think of anything.
And then Emma couldn't think of anything. Emma thought of the two exact same jokes that I thought of.
This isn't my job. This is under my pay grade.
I'm just saying. Anyway, I'm your find a path so the angry men don't run into each other, host Madelyn.
I'm your, oh man, I died again, host Emma.
And thanks for tuning in to this week's show. As you maybe guessed from the joke, this week we're going to be talking about Professor Layton and Returnal. Professor Layton.
Yes.
If you're
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
So two games that really couldn't be, I think, more different in terms of how you play them and how you feel when you play them. Maybe there's some frustration inherent in both.
Yeah.
A little. But I think in very different ways.
I guess so.
So, shall we talk about everyone's favorite hobbyist puzzle-solving professor?
Let's do it. Tell us about Professor Layton.
All right, so Professor Layton is a series of puzzle adventure games from level 5. There's 7 of them, plus some spin-off things, plus there's an animated film, plus there's an anime. So there's a lot of Professor Layton stuff out there. It's not Detective Conan,
No.
as I said last week. No relation. No crossovers.
No.
Not at all.
Did you look it up? If there are no
Detective-
crossovers, did you check?
Detective Conan. I didn't see any. Detective Conan, Professor Layton. No. The first thing that comes up is a Reddit who would win. Detective Conan versus Professor Layton.
Who would win?
It's a good question. They're asking in the context of who's better at solving crimes and mysteries.
Oh, okay.
Not like a death match.
So the question's that could Professor Layton beat up a child? I understand.
There's not really that many responses. It's just the only response is depends. How many puzzles does the mystery have? Which I think is a good question.
Sure, it's a good question, but I really felt like there would be a huge, fiery debate there.
I know. It's shocking. There's also apparently only one crossover piece of fan fiction between the two of them. That's the second thing.
Good to know.
Up. So there's a real glut of Conan Layton.
Someone needs to fill that in.
I don't know if they're at all similar. I don't know anything about Detective Conan except that he's a little detective. And
They're both they solve mysteries for sure.
Yeah. Anyway, in Professor Layton, in the first 3 games, you play as Professor Herschel Layton. Well, sort of. It's unclear to me if you are playing as Professor Layton or if you are playing as apprentice Luke Triton. I'm not sure who the POV character is supposed to be here. Kind of switches back and forth sometimes. But you two are running around, solving mysteries in this world where everybody freaking loves puzzles. There were a bunch of articles I read that were trying to figure out, when exactly in history does this take place? Based on what kind of planes people flew in, Professor Layton's car, what London looks like. It's folks, this is not real London. This is puzzled. Because everyone in this world, they see you and they're like, here's a logic puzzle. Solve my puzzle. Do you like puzzles? So
I
this is
know.
clearly
I
not the
saw
real
a
world.
few comments that they must have put a timeline somewhere because they were talking about how Professor Layton would have served the last 2 years of World War II, and that's why he can build a gun from scratch in one of the
Oh.
games.
Okay. I didn't realize there were too many guns in this game, but that's good to know.
This one shoots casino chips, I believe.
Neat.
It's one of, like, the last things you have to build in, like, the third game, I think. Last puzzles.
Fair enough. Mostly what you want to know about Professor Herschel Layton is that he wears a dope top hat.
He does.
And the man likes puzzles. So this is the game that I played for this week's episode because despite my PlayStation 4's best efforts, it's running again. It seems fine again, in case anyone was curious. That said, it does like to die when Click Boyfriend is out, and he's gone now. So I fully expect when I turn it on, it will just be like the PlayStation.
I can't believe it draws its power from him.
That's possible. I hadn't really thought about the fact that he has an electricity quirk, but that would make sense. So I don't have a PlayStation 5. I couldn't play Returnal, so we played Professor Layton on my equally obsolete cellular phone. Thanks. Big shout out to Emma for pointing me toward the iOS versions of this, which I should have found pretty easily, but I always start on the Wikipedia page, and the Wikipedia page doesn't make it super obvious right away that there are phone ports of this. Mm-hmm. So I almost bought the most recent one that has a port on the Switch, but people don't seem to love that one. So yeah. Glad I'm getting to do the original Professor Layton and what is it? And the Curious Village.
Yes.
While I'm playing. So that game came out originally in 2007 for the Nintendo DS, but you can now play it on mobile, even if you have a phone that is smaller than a Nintendo DS screen, as I do. I don't really remember, like, are people's normal phones now, like, the size of a Nintendo DS? I know they're not the size of a Nintendo DS, but are the screens, like, that size? Probably, right?
My phone is the size of my Nintendo DS.
Neat. Mine is tiny.
I'm looking at them because they're both blue. They're just the same thing. I mean, closed. A closed Nintendo DS, I should clarify.
Right, but, like, presumably the screen width is going to be similar. Anyway.
I think probably my phone is bigger than my DS, yes.
Well,
doesn't have buttons on it. It doesn't have edges, right?
I have a tiny phone and big adult gamer hands. As opposed to Emma's baby gamer hands.
Right, yeah.
So sometimes the touchscreen isn't the funnest. But I'm enjoying it so far. I've played about 2 hours of it. I think I've solved 25 puzzles, and the internet has told me there are about 130 in this game, so I'm like a sixth of the way through. No, yeah, a sixth, between a fifth and a sixth of the way through the puzzles, anyway. I really think I need probably more puzzle games in my life. I think it would be good for me to have a puzzle game in the rotation more often. Just playing this game has sparked our household screaming the Murder by Numbers music again.
Well, it's interesting. I was at the, like, when they were making this, Level 5, this was, like, one of their, I think it's their first game that they weren't making for someone else. They were making it for their own and self-publishing it. And so they picked the DS because that seemed like a simple enough place to start. But they were thinking, like, there was, like, research and data that's, like, it's sort of hard if you're not Nintendo to get noticed on the DS. Mm-hmm. With the exception of light users that used a lot of puzzle games like Brain Training. It was really popular. So the reason they went for a puzzle game was because that's where the market was. And it was initially supposed to be more of just a straightforward puzzle game because the director, Akihiro Hino, loved these puzzle books called Atama no Taiso.
That's head gymnastics.
Yes. And they were just planning to make an Atama no Taiso game. They even talked to the man who wrote them Akira Tago, and had him help with it. But they couldn't get the copyright for it. So they decided they'd had a plan to put a bonus mode in this that would have like a story that you'd go through solving puzzles. So they just took the bonus mode and decided to make that into the game to make it more of a narrative puzzle experience than just a puzzle game, which I thought was an interesting development process.
I would like puzzle games to have more, like, I just feel like the modern puzzle game scene, at least the past few years, there's not as many. I mean, of course, there's tons of puzzle games, right? But high-profile series or high-profile or even medium-profile releases.
I mean, I think it's because, like, they were so big on the DS and then they moved to mobile in some ways.
The Nintendo Switch is... what's the whole point of the Nintendo Switch being a handheld console?
I mean, Baba's You is like a puzzle game, that stuff in that sort of vein.
Okay, that's true. I just meant Baba's You doesn't have any story to it. Or I haven't, maybe you could unlock the story. It's
all about Baba. What are you talking about? The trials and tribulations of Baba.
Baba goes through a lot when I play that game. Baba goes through a lot of me almost throwing the controller through my television.
Yeah, I don't know if there really is a lot that is like Professor Layton that has like sort of a relatively intricate narrative in addition to just random puzzles that you can find. It's like a Talk This mashup, you might say.
Ooh.
I stole that line from you this time.
Yeah, I'll say it about Returnal too.
Okay.
So the Layton series released pretty much yearly from 2007 until 2013. And then they released Layton's Mystery Journey, so all of the games up to that point star Professor Layton. So there's a first trilogy, which is, Prof. Layton and Luke solving puzzles. And then the second trilogy is like a prequel thing. No, Luke is already like a child, so the idea that they were like, let's do this with an even younger kid.
Well, it's how he meets Luke.
I know. Still, though. I was like, this is bold. This is bold to be like, let's do a prequel with this game that's already about having a child mascot.
And you know how much gamers hate children, so you're right, it was a bold move to be like, let's make the child even smaller.
Gamers are children, so they just don't want to see themselves.
You're right. That's what it is.
In the game. But then Layton's Mystery Journey came out in 2017 for the 3DS, and that stars Professor Layton's daughter, his adoptive daughter, who he adopts after I think Luke leaves him, basically. Just like, okay.
I think after Luke gets old enough to leave him, not runs away in the middle of the night, to be clear.
No more puzzles. I've had enough. But it's about his adoptive daughter who, unlike Professor Layton, who is just a puzzle aficionado, but is an archaeology... Wow, that did not come out of my mouth right at all. An archaeology professor by trade. She is a detective, so it must be hard to be a detective in this world where everyone is like freaking puzzle fiends.
Yeah.
But some of us have to choose the hard path, I guess.
I mean, to be fair, Professor Layton does end up solving crimes relatively often. So.
But, he wouldn't care. He wouldn't care if he was solving crimes if you just put a good Sudoku in front of him.
You're right.
That would be just as satisfying for Herschel, I think. That's been my impression these first 2 hours, anyway. He's like, the first thing that happens in Curious Village is so in Curious Village... I'm jumping all over the place talking about this game, but whatever. In this first game that I'm playing, you and Luke get summoned to this town of Saint Mystery, of course, because the Baron died, and the Baroness has called you in because instead of leaving a normal will like a normal person, although frankly in this world, having a puzzle will is probably the normal thing to do, now that I think about it. But anyway, instead of having a normal will like a normal person where... I don't know, you just snub a family member because you feel like it to cause some drama, and that's it. He has a riddle or a puzzle of some kind. We have to find this golden apple, which is going to determine who's going to receive his fortunes. And so you go there, when you go to see the Baron, I mean, you solve like 20 puzzles on the way first. You go to see the Baroness after solving a puzzle for literally everyone you run into. Plus, if you like look at a clock. I love in this game when you just look at something and the professor's like, this reminds me of a puzzle. Luke, try this. This is why Luke runs away eventually. But you get there and her cat runs away. And everyone else is like, forget the cat. Let's talk about the golden apple. And Professor Layton is like, no, we have to find the cat. I mean, the Baroness is really obsessed with the cat, to be fair, and so she's pushing for you to find the cat. But Luke is like, Professor, what are we doing? And he's like, let's find the cat. Whatever. Let's find the cat. This guy does not care what the puzzle is, as long as it's a puzzle. Anyway, back to what I was actually saying 3 thoughts ago. They released a game about his daughter in 2017, and there's not been a new game since. So,
yeah.
It's the 15th anniversary this year, which means there's some fan excitement. And Level 5 did have some kind of hiring thing that was ambiguous enough that people thought it could be potentially alluding to a Professor Layton game. But 5 years since the last installment.
Level 5 has pretty much decimated its US department, though. So even if there is another Professor Layton, you'll probably have to import it from Europe if you're interested in playing it here. Because I don't think Level 5 has any current plans to start releasing stuff in the United States again. Just because it wasn't successful enough to justify it, apparently.
So, one thing to give everyone hope is that it's not as if Professor Layton has been 100% abandoned since 2017. There's an anime that came out starting in 2018. The mobile HD re-releases that I was playing came out in 2018 as well. The Switch port came for the most recent game was 2019. They just added like voices to that too last year. So like there's stuff that's happened. It's not totally dead. But I'm sorry to report that Layton I don't mean to say like Professor Layton is dead. That is another, sorry, this is such a horrifyingly bad transition here, but so the guy who wrote the Atama no Taiso books served as the puzzle master for all of these games, and he has passed away since the most recent game came out, I think. So they'd have to find a new puzzler. I feel like I've talked very little about what you do in the game, but it really is just like you run around and you solve brain teasers and you get pickerots.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I was saying there's really just not stuff that is like this, because it is very segmented. Like, there's some story stuff that happens, and then every once in a while, Layton's like, either I've thought of a puzzle, or there's a puzzle here, and you solve that puzzle. And it's some sort of, like, riddle, brain teaser, thought thing. There's a wide variety of puzzles that you can solve.
Yeah. For purposes of example, let's see. There was one that I alluded to in my introduction myself, where you run into a guy on the street and he's like, I hate 3 of my neighbors. They're bad dudes, but we all have to walk to work and we don't want to see each other. And so you help him plot a path so that all 4 of them can walk to their houses without ever crossing paths. It's like, that's one. There have been a bunch about moving matchsticks around to, like, turn 4 cubes into 3, or in a really dark one, look, here's a matchstick picture of a dog. Oh no, he got run over by a car. Move 2 matchsticks to show what the dog looks like now. And I did figure it out, but it was emotionally distressing. There've also
and that's why Luke ran away.
Yeah, he's like, stop making me do puzzles about dead animals, Professor. It's enough. There was one where you had to count how many times a clock would have the same number 3 times in a row in the course of a day. There's some, geometry ones with like the radius of a circle that took me an embarrassingly long time to solve, even though I tutored geometry. There's like another kind. I'm really bad at 3D, or even 2D sometimes, but mostly 3D spatial awareness is something I've always known about myself. It's something I've known about myself like since I took geometry as a kid. I'm just not very good at 3D visualization and like rotating shapes in my head. This is probably like a mental deficit, right? Like,
it's fine.
If I was like a kid who was like having my skills assessed, they'd be like, Madelyn is deficient in 3D visualization and the ability to manipulate 3D shapes mentally. Anyway, I feel like it's very hard. I have a hard time with it. So there have definitely been some of those puzzles where I've had to stare at it for a really long time to figure it out. But the puzzles have basically nothing to do with what's going on most of the time.
No.
Like, very lightly. I'm finding that doesn't really bother me. I've always liked brainy puzzles. They have the classic, it was wolves and chicks. I feel like I learned this puzzle as wolves and sheep. But the, like, having them on one side of the river, like, how do you get everybody across without them eating the sheep puzzle. I've always enjoyed these kinds of puzzles. I'm just a dork, I guess. Mostly is the easiest way to put it.
It's true.
So I'm not really caring that much that the puzzles don't have anything to do with what's going on. There's some nice little animated sequences. The animation is better than I would have expected it to be.
Yeah.
So overall, if I can get over the hurdle of like, bleh, it's a phone game, I'll probably keep playing it. I do wish that these ones were on the Switch.
Yeah, that'd be nice, wouldn't it?
It would.
Me looking at the entire DS library, like, wow, sure would be nice if this was on the Switch. Nintendo.
Ooh, Nintendo.
Nintendo. They don't even bother trying to look busy. They're just like, yeah, it would be. Bye.
Maybe that's the next console. They're like, the Nintendo Switch, and they've got it, and then they're like, it folds.
Aren't there like those foldable smartphones now?
That's exactly what I was thinking of, yes.
Yeah. I don't like those.
I know, and that's why I think this would be really funny.
No, it really feels like you're more likely to find, like, the DS library on iOS than you are on Switch.
Which is a bummer if you're me and your phone has a battery life of about 20 minutes. And
you could get a new phone anytime you wanted, Malice. I've had that phone for like 7 years.
I think it's coming up on 6. I think it's going to be 6 years old in July.
It's going to kindergarten, Malin.
Yeah. It's very smart. It's a smart little phone. But overall, I think the Professor Layton games should come back. I realize there, I guess, must be like a finite number of brain teasers in the world. Something I thought was so interesting about people like writing about this game was like, they're like, there's no replay value. It's like, yeah, of course there's no replay value. It's a puzzle game.
Yeah.
Get over yourself.
I mean, you don't, I'm pretty sure you don't have to solve all the puzzles to finish the games.
No, you don't.
And there might even be, like, I think there's some of them have, like, extra puzzle sections where you can just, like, do some puzzles.
A lot of them did have, and I think that these are now bundled into the game, they had, like, weekly puzzles that came out via the DS Wi-Fi connection. So hip.
Yeah.
They do also have, like, some of the puzzles are missable, right? Because you just, like, you have to click on the right thing on the screen or talk to the right person, and eventually they go do something else. But they appear in the Puzzle Shack. So you don't have to miss a puzzle, which is nice. I'm already feeling a little completionist about it.
Yeah. I mean, that's just what I'm saying. There's no replay value, but you still can solve a lot of puzzles.
I know. That's just why I thought it was so funny. All of these games, the first one has 135 puzzles, and that's the least. The most recent game has like 180 plus puzzles. And so it's like, come on, people. I mean, I'll admit that I balked a little. Like the new one on Switch, the newest one on Switch is like $40. And I'll admit, I was pleased to pay $10 for the iOS one. But yeah, I was just like, why would you even say there's no, like, nobody needs to be told there's no replay value. That's what a puzzle, like, your crossword book doesn't have any, your Sudoku book doesn't have any replay value. Like, yeah. Mostly, though, I just realized that I think I want more puzzles in my life.
Good for your brain.
I keep meaning to buy, like, a book of Sudoku stuff, but then I don't. I just sit and I look at my little phone.
Yeah, the thing about, I mentioned that they were trying to, like, go towards, like, the puzzle-solving market on the DS with this. But I found it really interesting. There was a story of, like, the Japanese box art for The Curious Village. And I think it might have been the North American one, too. Just centers Layton and Luke on the front and, like, the characters on the box art. But over in Europe, I think Nintendo of Europe wanted to change the box art to center the puzzles. So it's like a black thing with the top hat that has like a bunch of puzzles in it and like the characters on the side. And initially the developers were really against this, I guess because they liked the box art that they had, right? But by designing it that way, it was meant to like be like the Brain Age type box art, right? So it actually did sell very well in Europe, because the box art helped it meet the market that they wanted to get it to.
As I said in last week's show, I don't really understand marketing. No, that makes sense to me.
Yeah. What I don't understand, I didn't look into it, even though it was piquing my curiosity, is all of the North American titles are like different by one word for some reason. Like, I don't know why. Like, Curious Village is just Curious Village for all of it. But the next game in Europe, it's Professor Layton and Pandora's Box. And in North America, it's Professor Layton and the Diabolical Box.
Well, North America doesn't know what Pandora's Box is.
But diabolical is a big 3-letter word, you know? That's not the saying. What is the saying? Is $3 word?
I think $3 word is fine, yeah.
Do you know what the phrase is I'm looking for?
The phrase is something dollar word, but I've heard it with various dollar amounts.
Okay.
With inflation, you know.
The third game is Lost Future versus Unwound Future. The next one is Spectre's Call versus Last Spectre.
I don't understand marketing.
I at least get Spectre that's spelled the European way, and then it's spelled the North American way. I understand that, but otherwise I don't get it. The rest of them are the same.
Maybe it's so that they like don't accidentally mix up the box art or like the files. You know?
Maybe. I don't know. It's just very weird to me.
That was
some very weird changes.
The Pandora one, I was thinking like, oh, like maybe Pandora, like the internet radio, like held some kind of copyright that made that complicated, but the rest just don't make sense.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, I'd like to live in a world with more puzzles.
I could start. Every time we do this recording, we could start with a puzzle. And we can't start recording until you solve it.
We can barely. The puzzle that I do every time before we start recording is, how can I pronounce the syllables of the games in such a way that I can introduce it with a leading question. And mostly I fail those puzzles. Well, shall we talk about Returnal?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay, so Returnal, it's kind of like a Tactics mashup. It's a third-person shooter roguelike bullet hell from Housemarque, published by Sony. Housemarque now owned by Sony, but not at the time of Returnal coming out.
Yes.
It was released last April, pretty much exactly, I guess it's not April anymore. I was going to say pretty much exactly a year ago. It is mid-May, but almost exactly a year ago. It was released. It's that rare beast, a PS5 exclusive.
Yes.
Not as rare, I suppose, as the Xbox exclusive, but still, the rare beast.
Yes. I mean, especially the rare beast of it being next-gen console exclusive.
Right, especially. But I meant next-gen Xbox exclusive.
Yes. Yeah.
Basically doesn't exist.
Yes.
It's also coming to the new PS Plus.
Yeah. A lot of games are.
It's one of the marketed games coming to the new PS Plus. How about
I understand. So I got this bundled with my PS5. And I was interested enough to hold on to it, unlike MLB The Show, which I did exchange. So I actually played a few runs of this.
Wow.
For this. I don't know if I will stick with it. Not really because there's anything wrong with it, just because it's stressful.
Yeah.
And I do not know if I have the bandwidth for that sort of game right now. But other than the stressfulness, I enjoyed my time with it. Basically, so you're an astronaut named Celine. You're flying, tracking this mysterious white shadow broadcast on like an alien planet. And all of a sudden you're hit by some sort of projectile. Your ship is damaged and you crash land on this land. So, there's nothing that you can't contact anyone. Your ship is totally busted. So there's nothing to do but leave your ship and explore this alien planet to try to find this white shadow broadcast and, ideally find a way off of this planet. However, you soon discover that you have been here before because you find your bodies on the ground as you go through. And eventually you also die and realize that you're stuck sort of reviving at the point that your ship crashed. And you have to go through over and over. Hence the roguelike.
Woo! Time loop game.
Well, actually, it's interesting because it's not a time loop because your bodies are still there. Time actually continues progressing. It's just that you are reviving at the ship. So, that's an important distinction for the plot.
Fair enough. You're right. Housemarque made a big deal out of this being like, this is our game that has a story in it. Which I thought was interesting. I mean, obviously they've mostly made like bullet hell type stuff before
this. Yes, they've only made 2D bullet hells before this.
I still found it kind of amusing for them to be like, yes, moving forward we might have stories in our games.
I read a summary of Harry Kruger, the director's GDC talk, talking about working on Returnal, and it really does sound like they were just like, well, okay. We're just gonna do everything new.
Yeah.
So they started, this was their first game in Unreal. So they were learning how to use that. Their first 3D game, so they were learning how to do that. And they apparently tripled the size of their team over the course of development, which I imagine meant that they had to do a lot of work on their process over the course of this to accommodate that many more people.
Right. Somebody had to learn how to manage.
Yes. So, like, one of the things he said is, it's not an exaggeration to say that for half of the game's development time, it was unplayable.
Yikes.
Because they were learning the engine, they were breaking things, creating things that they didn't understand, and just learning as they went. And with all that in mind, the fact that it came out so, it came out the way it was is pretty impressive, to be honest.
That's not to say that there wasn't some friction around the first couple months of this game being out. We can talk about the save system stuff in a minute, but there was a lot of stuff that was like, oh, the game crashed and I lost 2 hours of progress, which is tough. I mean, that's tough in any game, but I think in a game like this, that can particularly feel awfully frustrating a lot of the time. Probably they just should have built it in. They should have been like, sometimes the game will crash, and like, that's part of the experience.
That would suck. Yeah. I mean, one of the things he talks about here, and again, he didn't really touch on the save state stuff, but in terms of the difficulty itself, he talked about how they were really trying to approach it the same way that they did their 2D games, because it's also a bullet hell, right? Because they've made bullet hells before this, and the only difference is this one's now 3D. But they learned over the course of development that, like, it's very different to make something in 3D than it is in 2D.
Who would have thought?
And he thought that approach made it seem really hard for players because you have to be shooting and also moving a lot. And so trying to do two things at once in a game that has this much like chaotic stuff happening around you can be rather difficult to get used to. And he said that probably they should have made the aim assist a little stronger.
Well, maybe, because it's the only difficulty setting that you get.
Yes, there's no difficulty settings in this.
You know, I'll give my usual sort of eye roll to that, and some of the commentary that I think it was the director made about that too recently also made, like, whenever people are like, the difficulty is integral to the experience, and it's like, yeah, yes, okay, I get it, but I also get a little bit, I roll my eyes at you just a little bit. Whatever. I do think, though, this game is interesting in its, like, intentional hostility toward the player, or intentional desire to make you feel tired and frustrated. That's a game that I think, that's not a game, that's a design implementation that I think is not often seen, and like there's just a fear of that, of like intentionally tiring out the player or intentionally frustrating the player, or which here, at least in the way they talk about it, seems to be intentionally applied to make you sort of experience what the character is experiencing, which is interesting.
Yeah.
And bold, certainly.
Yeah. I mean, the risk you take with having like a single difficulty level is that you are segmenting your audience, right? There's going to be people who find it just right and will get that experience that you wanted them to get. There'll be people who find it too easy, and there will be people who find it too hard, and both those sides will be unable to get the experience that you wanted them to get. And you just have to sort of be accepting of that if that's something that you want to do.
I do actually feel like for these teams and artists who have this perspective of like, the difficulty is the difficulty and like that's the experience I want you to have, that being on these subscription services is actually a blessing, right? Returnal was a $70 game when it came out, and I think, I don't know, since it came out, I played a lot of Binding of Isaac, and obviously this was not that long after Cook Like Boyfriend's like Hades obsession, so like maybe this is a game we would have gotten if it was on the PS4, but I do think a lot of the chatter around how difficult and frustrating it was would have made me hesitant to pick it up at full price, whereas if I find myself with a PS5 and a PS Plus subscription, like, yeah, of course, we'll probably try it.
That's a whole other topic. I was reading an article this week about devs, the Fury devs, who are not releasing updates on Xbox because it's just not cost efficient, because all of their game things came from Game Pass, and so they didn't really make any money off of that port, basically. Right. So it wasn't cost effective for them to release those updates. So it's interesting to think of how streaming affects that. Of course, it's a little bit different if you're owned by the company that
Right.
you're going on the streaming service for. But still.
Yes, sorry. That's not to say concerns of the economics of game making make that make sense. But for a game, if you're going to be uncompromising in your difficulty vision,
I mean, more than I just want more games to release demos. Is really what I want.
don't they have to?
I think that they're implementing a rule that they have to now. They don't.
Yeah.
They didn't have to before that, but I think that's. I think that's both good, and I feel sorry for the development teams that have to do that. The two sides of me, two wolves inside of me. One of them plays games. One of them makes games.
Poor
And
Emma.
they both hate gamers.
All right, so let me ask those two wolves a question. I'll throw them the two chicks to eat, right, from
Sure.
Professor Layton. But what are your thoughts on the recent trend of no save?
Well, I think in Returnal it wasn't very intentional, to be honest.
Okay, but they definitely tried to play it off as intentional at first.
I didn't get that impression. I got the impression that because this game was so hard for them to make, they had locked themselves into a state where it would have been a lot of work to add that at the point where they thought they might want to add that.
Okay, fair enough. I guess I just mean, maybe this wasn't coming from the developers, but I do feel like there was a lot of chatter around the game that was like, no, the no saving thing is part of the brutal, crushing experience of the game.
Well, I don't know. The reason they didn't implement until late was because they couldn't, because it was very hard.
Yeah.
They have now implemented a save suspend, so clearly they didn't feel that passionately about it if that came from them. What other games are you thinking of?
Well, I was thinking of the no pause Elden Ring
well, that's
situation,
different.
which I know is different.
Dark Souls lets you save.
I know. I just meant, I just felt like those were, well, they're not the exact same thing. They're these kind of like, I don't know, kindred ideas of, and maybe here it wasn't intentional, although, look, respect that making games is hard, but I just can't imagine being like, yes, I can release my game without the ability to save.
Well, it's not that you can never save, you just
No,
can't
I know.
save during the loop.
I know. Sorry, I'm being too harsh. It's just, in the era of constant autosave that we're in, it's like, it's just a baffling little thing. That's all. But obviously this game was, like, held together by bubblegum. Right?
Yes.
So,
I really think that was the main issue for this, is that they were tackling a lot of things that they didn't know how to do.
yeah.
And some things got overlooked because of that.
But I still think in the way that it was talked about in some of the kind of reviews, I mean, a lot of people were just kind of irritated with it, but there was a lot of kind of the, like, justifying of it, of, like, no, like, the point of this is that it's exhausting to make it through a run, and if you can stop in the middle, that compromises that experience.
I mean, I would be more sympathetic to that if a run was like an hour.
Right.
But what I read is that a full run could take you up to 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah.
Which is it's just not feasible to really be doing that in a single sitting for a lot of people. I mean, you can pause theoretically and leave it. A lot of people were trying to get around it by leaving it in a suspend state, but if it happened to have an update,
right, you lose everything.
You'd lose your progress. Yeah. The other thing about Returnal that I imagine might have made this more frustrating is, at least, like, in Hades, if you couldn't save and lost your progress, like, you know, you're like, oh, I'll just reset the run and put my points into something, you know, and try again later. So there's still that sense of progress.
Yeah.
Returnal's only a roguelite in that you get some permanent upgrades, like traversal options and like
Your guns,
an
your weapons
altar-
get upgrades, right?
no.
Or they
You
give
get-
you abilities?
You get one thing, you get like an altar fire. That's not what it's called. There's 2 different types of fire. There's your normal bullets and your special attack. And each gun has a different one. And you reset with a different gun at the beginning every single time, as far as I could tell. A different special, essentially. And you find guns on the way. And I believe you have, like, a proficiency level, although it's not clear to me whether this gets reset or not. That makes it so you can find better weapons. But it doesn't, it raises the floor on the weapons you can find. But that's it. So, no, your weapons do not get better. You don't get stronger. Or anything.
Brutal.
So, it's only barely a roguelite, is what I would say. So even if you reset your progress, you don't make any progress. Maybe you've learned some knowledge of how to fight the enemies, but you don't get any way to get stronger or progress at all. So there's no sense of well, it's fine, Yeah. And I think that's probably where some of the frustration came from as well.
Well, who cares when it's haptic, baby?
Well, so I did 5 attempts. My attempts are about probably 20 minutes.
Yeah.
I'd say. So far. Not very long runs. The first one I went, you run into the first hard enemy and I died there. And I got the title sequence after that. So I was whatever. They sort of want you to die there. Who cares?
Yeah.
The second one, I found the second fire method. And I did not understand how it worked.
The triggers, the special triggers.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
So the way it works is, and it did not even occur to me that these could be used this way before then. I've had things that use the triggers that make it harder to push down to add that brr to it. But the way Returnal works is there's literally 2 levels to the L2. So you push it in halfway. There's there's a resistance there, and you can do your normal fire. If you push it in all the way, I have a tendency to do with my baby gamer claw grip.
Adult gamer claw grip.
You do the special fire. But the special fire recharges, right? So when I first picked it up, I did not understand. And I just was pushing it down and trying to fire and was why isn't anything happening?
Oh no.
What am I doing? Should I not have picked up this special upgrade? Has it made it so that my gun can only fire every 10 seconds in exchange for it being a big bomb? I don't want that. How do I take it off? And I was looking through the pause menu. I was can I drop this? Can I get rid of this? And then I died and was reset back. And spent about 5 minutes just in the safe opening area until I finally figured it out. I Googled it. I Googled, what is wrong with my gun, Returnal. And then I figured it out.
Wow. A baby gamer and an adult gamer all at once.
But yes, I have found it very mean. There's a lot of what's happening in this room, just figure it out while dodging a jajillion bullets. So there's a gimmick where sometimes you're quarantined into a room, and what you have to do is there's a green thing with a thing on the top that you need to destroy, and then that makes the rest of the enemies not invulnerable. But it doesn't tell you this. You just sort of have to figure it out. So I ran into this. I figured it out in the second attempt. I died on the first one because I was I don't understand what's happening here. Also, sometimes you can find your own dead bodies and click on them to see what I assume a real player died there. And I assumed it was just some fun little gimmick. But then I was 1 room away from where I was supposed to go to get to the next bit of progress. And apparently those bodies can be infected with bad enemies. Oh. And so I was murdered.
Man, the dead body pick something up from it thing is also a big trend right now, isn't it?
Dark Souls, baby.
Dark Souls, baby.
Yeah. Dark Souls, baby.
Baby. I've just been thinking the whole time about what it would be like to have like a movie where you weren't allowed to, like, you could pause it, but, or like a TV series where they're like, you can pause, but if you want to come back, like, there's no fast forward or anything. Like, you just have to watch from the beginning.
That'd be fun.
I guess that's just like television, but that's fun.
There you go. The one thing about Returnal that does stand out is it is one of these, like, prestige 3D action games that has a older lady as the protagonist. Still a white older lady, but still. That
Alien, baby.
You're right, it probably is because of Ripley.
Yeah. Like, we can have white older ladies, but only if they're in space.
Yeah, you're right. Anyway, I enjoyed it for what it was when I was playing it, but it is like a sort of psychological horror game that is also very frantic action-y, and it's just sort of tiring.
Well, we can play it together when I get a PS5.
Maybe that would be fun, yeah.
I
did watch some analysis videos that spoiled the plot for me as well, so.
Oof.
I mean, on purpose. I did that on purpose.
I know. I was so excited when I saw they've launched co-op, but of course it's all online.
Yeah. Well, it would be... I think it would be hard to... In the same way as save states, I think it might be a lot of work to implement a whole local co-op.
I'm just gonna have to get his and hers PS5s.
The online co-op and the photo mode were intended to be at launch, actually, but they had to push those things back to make them free DLC.
Well, are you ready to mash these two games up?
Yeah. You must, Luke, okay? You're being shot at. Please solve this puzzle. That's the game. That's why Luke ran away.
Well, I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, what would a roguelike puzzle game be?
As soon as you fail a puzzle, you're sent back to the start and get more procedurally generated puzzles that you have to solve.
Would that be fun?
If you liked puzzles.
How would you, like, keep it fresh?
I don't know.
Like,
well, maybe you could have, like, several of the same type of puzzle, like, reskinned that you might hit at a certain point, and so the player gets good at being like, I understand this puzzle.
This, though, is just the SAT.
Yes. We should make an SAT study game. Where sometimes you're also, when you get a question wrong, you are shot.
Oh boy.
No, I think making like a narrative SAT testing game that's like a psychological horror. You know, that's a game for change.
I can't believe we've stumbled. Emma, this is a game we could actually make. I feel like you have the coding skills to put together this game.
I could try. Yeah, it's like you're preparing for the SAT, and every time you get a question wrong, like, your life devolves a little bit more, you know?
There can be, like, debuffs, where it's like, oh, you can't see the clock. You've sweat on the page, so you can't read everything. You've cried on the page, so you can't read anything.
Yeah, you do, you pick up, a lot of Returnals, like, you pick up stuff that both buffs you and debuffs you at the same time.
Yeah.
So you could play with that, definitely, in test taking, I think.
Yeah. This sucks, though. These are both games that people like.
What do you mean they'd like this game? They'd write think pieces on this game.
They would. You're right that they would, but we'd get a cease and desist.
It kind of, I feel like actually if you put sort of the vibes of these two games together, you'd get something like Her Story or Telling Lies or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know those games, right?
Yeah.
like where you're looking through like stuff and piecing together what happened. It's a little bit creepy because you're like looking into people's lives or whatever. So I feel like if you like took like the vibes of both these games, you'd end up with something like that.
Maybe you could do sort of like, I'm trying to think of like, okay, I could have a big puzzle and then there's a bullet hell within that, and then there's puzzles within the bullet hell. So like, so many of these puzzles are like, find the right route following the clues, right? So we can create like a labyrinth game where you have to be like accurately following the clues as you go, right? And then if you don't accurately follow the clues, you run into a bullet hell room. And so then you have to dodge the bullets, but if you get hit by a bullet, you've got a chance to save yourself by solving increasingly difficult math problems.
Sure. That sounds interesting.
Does it? Do people want increasingly difficult math problems in their game? Probably
somebody
not.
Does.
I don't know. Maybe it feels like you could make this feel enough of the this is not gonna, you're gonna laugh at me when I say this. Like, it could feel a little WarioWare-y.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Maybe it's like you have to solve, like, you could do it as increasingly difficult math problems, or you could do it as every time you get hit with a bullet, you have to solve increasingly quickly, like logic puzzles. Really what I want is a game. Do you remember those like logic puzzles when we were kids where it's like you have like the big chart and it's like you had to figure out like which of the people has red hair and which of them has brown hair. Yeah. I really just want that, but a game.
Isn't that a board game?
Well, Guess Who is a board game.
Yeah.
Yes, but there were more complicated versions of this. Anyway.
Guess Who, the video game.
That's not what I'm saying.
Where every once in a while one of the Guess Who's is an eldritch monster.
Where every person who's not the person you're guessing gets shot. Well, folks, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
If you enjoyed the show, hit us up on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. You can also visit our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games that are in the hat, and read our blog featuring long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend and Split Screen. But most importantly, if you like the show, you should subscribe so you never miss an episode on Sundays at noon. We are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Cast, really anywhere you can find podcasts. Wherever you found the podcast today, you can find and subscribe to Talk This. Next week, it's Emma's side quest. So something exciting, no doubt. We'll just talk about cup noodles again. But in 2 weeks, for Memorial Day, what's on the agenda?
For our old game, we will be talking about Earth Defense Force.
Nice.
And for our new game, we'll be talking about Pokemon Legends Arceus.
Now I have to actually play it.
Arceus?
I'm not going to take a stance. Let's pretend that I know.
Arceus?
Excellent. I look forward to the Pokemon Earth Defender squad.
Yep.
We'll look forward to that in 2 weeks and to Emma's side quest next week. But Emma, are you ready to sign off?
This week, I hope that you are not stuck in an endless hell of your own creation.